Tell me this. What's your biggest takeaway from those rankings?
To me, Molly, it looks like the Big Ten schools, especially Indiana and Penn State, are being valued by their one-loss record as opposed to their schedule. The biggest beef is really Georgia. It is a common theme now, but they played the toughest schedule in the country, and they've lost to two teams that are ranked ahead of them. And I would maintain that Indiana, with the same schedule, would probably have 4 or 5 losses. They will play Ohio State this week, and I think that's great. Can't wait to see the game. But I just think Georgia is being punished because of the schedule in the league that they're in. And what it really means is that they're in the playoffs, but they'll have to start on the road probably at one of those Big Ten schools, which I find to be ridiculous.
I happen to agree with you, Paul, 100%. You and I have been on the same page with this all year long. They are overrating this Big Ten. How is Penn State this high? I mean, you got to be kidding me. Penn State this high? Penn State? They have done. I had calls telling me this week on the radio, well, they beat Wisconsin on the road, and Oregon struggled. What? They beat Wisconsin? This is what you're going to tell me now about Penn State, trying to make a case for Penn State? Indiana, we're going to find out about them this week, so let's leave Indiana alone. If they ever beat Ohio State, I can justify it. With you right now, they're not nearly as good as these SEC teams. Georgia's the second best team in the country. Okay, I don't care what anybody says. If Beck plays like that, they're the best team. But right now, they're the second best team in the country. And two quickies. Miami should not be, the 8th, 9th? What is Miami? How is Miami 8th? They should have lost to Cal. They almost lost to Duke, and they got beat at Georgia Tech. How could they be 8th, Paul? And I'll tell you something else. I don't have a problem with all the conferences getting into the tournament, but why in the world should the ACC and the Big 12 get a top 4 seed and get a bye? Why is that the case? Let them play. Let them play. I don't understand that. What, if Georgia doesn't win their conference, they can't get a bye when they're the top 4 teams? That's ridiculous. I don't like that. Well, there's some things I don't like about it, but Miami 8th is too high.
Well, let me ask y'all a question. What the hell did Miami do? Look awful in practice, and there was cameras rolling that showed it? How did Alabama jump them? Because you beat Mercer? What are we talking about here? How did that happen? And so I'm looking at it from that standpoint, and I'm saying, wait a minute, that's a huge question mark on that. Outside of that, Penn State, Indiana, I'm just looking at them. Indiana's got to show. Listen, I feel more comfortable with Indiana having a top 5 slide if I see them beat Ohio State this week.
I agree.
If I see something like that, then I'll be more excited about it. Miami, their defense doesn't look that impressive. Offensively, they struggled. I saw them get smacked around by Georgia Tech a couple weeks ago, so I wasn't happy about that. So I think about those things as well. Georgia having the strength of schedule. I love the fact that Georgia has moved back into the mix because their strength of schedule is tops in the game. And when you consider the fact that they did that and they went and they handled their business against Tennessee and they only had 2 losses, I'm going to give credit where credit is due in that regard and say I want to see Georgia up there. But what really stood out for me was Alabama jumping Miami, even though you didn't play anybody. And Miami literally didn't play anybody because they had a bye week. I don't get that.
Paul, one question for you. And this is going to be fascinating. Next Saturday at 7:30 on our networks here. If Texas loses at College Station, they can't play in the SEC championship game because they'd have 2 losses in the conference, and Texas A&M would be one of the top 2 teams. Could Texas be knocked out?
They could. And Texas is the weak link in the SEC as far as the schedule and it's unfair on one level because they went to Michigan. They're the defending national champs. They were ranked very high. Michigan turned out to be a bad team, so they're not going to get credit for that. But the loss at A&M would be very costly. But back to the Georgia argument for a minute, Stephen A. They're not valuing Georgia because of having 2 losses, but they're also not valuing the win. I mean, they have a win over the committee's number 3 team in the country on the road, and they also don't factor in the wear and tear. I talked to Kirby Smart Friday night, and I understand he was politicking, but he was also telling the truth. He said, do you have any idea what it's like to play on the road at Texas, at Alabama, and at Ole Miss? Those are all top 10 teams. It takes a toll on your team, and that's as opposed to Penn State essentially playing nobody except Ohio State, and right. Indiana playing Charlotte and Florida International and Western Illinois. It's a different schedule.
What's the love with Penn State? How did Penn State end up in there as a top 5 team?
I have no idea. I mean, they have not. They played West Virginia. They're not big non-conference game. Okay, great. And then they played a one-score game against Ohio State, which I don't value that much. They have a win, don't laugh, at USC. I think the game went into overtime. I mean, that really was one of their biggest moments of the year. I think the problem with where the committee is there's not, you can't really change Georgia because Georgia plays UMass and Georgia Tech, and Indiana will help itself if it has a good game. I mean, we are really watching Indiana at Ohio State, and the measuring stick is how close is the game, not whether they win or not.
Yeah,
if they can make a good game out of it, they're going to punch a ticket.
And I'll tell you something else. Let's be fair, too. How about Notre Dame? They have done nothing. We're going to make a big deal about them beating Navy when Navy just lost 35-0 to Tulane. I had that game, by the way. It was a loss. Are we going to make a big deal about Notre Dame? They lost to Northern Illinois at home.
It's precluded from getting a bye because they're not in a conference.
But they
don't play like this.
They get a home game.
That's what's not fair. And Notre Dame scheduled, I mean, they got hurt by Southern Cal being a bust. Southern Cal was supposed to be a highly regarded team, but ultimately, not having a conference schedule, I don't think a lot of people understand what that does. The playing, especially in the SEC. I know everybody. Well, here goes the SEC guy. But listen, I've covered it my whole life. You guys understand it. It's not the same as going to Purdue. And Wisconsin. I mean, they're all good in their own way, but it's not Texas, it's not Alabama, it's not Georgia, it's not Tennessee.
Okay.
All right. We'll leave it there. Paul, thank you so much for being
Thanks,
with us.
Paul.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
I might turn a little, I might work a lot, counting down the good times, staring down the clock, throw some high